Do you love all things lands? Do you want to run an insane 4-color deck? Then Omnath, Locus of Creation might be the commander for you. Omnath, Locus of Creation is a 4-drop red, green, white, blue, 4/4 legendary creature elemental. When Omnath, Locus of Creation enters the battlefield, draw a card. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you do a different thing depending on how many times it's happened. 1 time, you gain 4 life. 2 times, add red, green, white, blue to your mana pool. Or 3 times, deal 4 damage to each opponent and each planeswalker you don't control. Omnath is the core that this entire deck is built around, and while there's still plenty of ways for the deck to work even without Omnath on the battlefield, our commander here is a great help for us to stabilize, ramp, and even ping our opponents for some damage occasionally. The drawing a card is simply a cherry on top. An important part of the Omnath deck is being able to play extra lands in a turn, that way we can activate their various abilities. We accomplish this by playing cards like Mina and Den Wildborn, a 4-drop 4/4 elf ally that lets us play an additional land on each of our turns, and we can use their ability to return a land we control to our hand. And then a creature gains trample until end of turn, but let's be honest, we're just here to get that land back, that way we can play it again. Azusa Lost But Seeking is a 3-drop 1/2 legendary creature human monk that allows us to play 2 additional lands on each of our turns. And then Dryad of the Elysian Grove is a 3-drop 2/4 creature type nymph that allows us to play an additional land on each of our turns, and lands we control are every basic land type in addition to their other types, meaning all of our lands tap for every single color. This will also help us ramp into our bigger threats in the late game. Next we have the meat and potatoes of the deck, our cards with landfalls, such as Felidar Retreat, a 4-drop enchantment with landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, choose one. Create a 2/2 white cat beast creature token, or put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain vigilance until end of turn. This card's great because it lets you create a board and then beef it up, because it doesn't matter how many cats you have if they aren't a threat to begin with. Then we have Morag, Fury of Akum, a 6-drop 6/6 Minotaur Warrior. Each creature you control gets +1/+0 for each time it is attacked this turn. Landfall. Whenever land enters the battlefield under your control, if it's your main phase, there's an additional combat phase after this phase. At the beginning of that combat, untap all creatures you control. Morag is here to help us close out the game. Most games, we will be swinging in order to win, so being able to do that multiple times in a turn makes our job a lot easier. Scute Swarm is a 3-drop 1/1 creature-type insect. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, create a 1/1 green insect creature token. If you control 6 or more lands, create a token that's a copy of Scute Swarm instead. I would argue Scute Swarm is the best landfall card in the deck. I know compared to the last 2 it may seem innocuous, but it's real strong, guys. If we're sub 7 lands, then we're only getting 1/1s, which isn't bad, but it's not game-breaking either. However, if we get to 7 lands, we get to make copies of it. Exact copies of it. Including the line of text that says we can copy it. That means we go from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 8, and so on until our board is super out of control. Next we have cards that care about our lands, but they aren't going wide in the exact same way as our Army in a Can cards. Phylath World Sculptor is a 6-drop 5/5 creature type elemental. Avenger of Zendikar is a 7-drop 5/5 creature type elemental. And they both give us some number of green plant creature tokens when they enter the battlefield, depending on how many lands we control. They also both beef up those plant tokens slowly over the game. Phylath all at once making them 4/4s and 8/8s. Avenger of Zendikar just giving every single one +1/+1. These cards are a great way to make a board out of nowhere and claw our way back into the game after a board wipe. Titania, Protector of Agroth, is a 5-drop 5/3 legendary creature elemental. When Titania, Protector of Agroth, enters the battlefield, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever a land you control is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, create a 5/3 green elemental creature token. Titania is a powerful card that synergizes greatly with any fetch land you can get your hands on, and this brings up a very important point. While it is strictly better to run fetch lands like Arid Mesa, for the sake of triggering cards like our Commander and Titania, cards like Evolving Wilds are perfectly acceptable. We run several cards to let us play lands from the grave rather than just running more lands. It's far more efficient to just replay lands we've already played. Such cards include Crucible of Worlds, which is a 3-drop artifact that lets us play land cards from our graveyard. Ranumap Excavator may seem familiar because he is a 3-drop creature 2/3 Naga Cleric that lets us play lands from our graveyard. Splendid Reclamation is a 4-drop sorcery that lets us return all lands from our graveyard to the battlefield tap. In this deck, we run exclusively Land Ramp, except Sol Ring, because, Sol Ring. This is because we use these in the early game to be able to ramp into our threats and Commander, and then we use them late game to trigger all of our cards. This way, we're pretty much never going to be dead in our hand. Farseek is a 2-drop sorcery that lets us search for a plains, island, swamp, or mountain put it onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. Cultivate is 2 and a green for a sorcery. Search your library for up to 2 basic land cards, reveal those cards, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and the other into your hand, and then shuffle. Rampant Growth, 1 and a green. Search your library for a basic land card, put that card onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. And like most decks, we run some amount of interaction. Fair warning though, you will probably want to bump up how much interaction you play depending on your playgroup. I run very lean on it. Just a few cards like Path to Exile, which lets us exile a creature, and then its controller may search their library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tap. Vandal Blast, which lets us destroy target artifact you don't control, and overloads into destroying every artifact we don't control. And then Heroic Intervention to keep our board safe. Permanents you control gain hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. And don't forget, lands don't all just tap for mana. Some have abilities of their own, and while we do run a few, we don't want to run too many since we're already a 4-colored deck. Great examples are Givani Township, a land that adds 1 colorless, or pay 2 a green and white, tap, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. This is great because it allows us to have something to do when we have a ton of mana and nothing to do with it. Beefing up our board can be real strong. Speaking of beefing up our board, Field of the Dead is a land that enters the battlefield tapped and taps for colorless. It also creates a 2/2 black zombie creature token whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control if you control 7 or more different lands with different names. If you're trying to make a budget version of this deck and want to include Field of the Dead, I recommend splitting your basics between normal basics and snow basics since they have different names. Finally, we have lands that can also be cast as spells as a great late game way to deal with flooding if we've already hit enough land drops in the turn. For example, Balagad Sanctuary can also be a sorcery that gets us cards back from our grave. And don't worry, I haven't forgot about the Johnnies out there. We run a 2-card combo in Thespian Stage and Dark Depths. Dark Depths is a land that enters with 10 ice counters on it and lets you remove them slowly over the course of the game until you're able to create a massive indestructible flying avatar. And while getting to that the normal way is all fine and dandy, we have a better plan. Thespian Stage is a land that lets us pay to have it become a copy of any land we control, so we make it a copy of Dark Depths. Since it's already on the battlefield and just transforms, it doesn't have the 10 ice counters on it, so when the copy checks itself, it instantly makes a Merit Lodge creature token. Do note that doing this will get rid of both lands due to the legendary rule, but you tell me, what's more important, 2 lands or a 20/20 flying creature? So, what did you think? If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, consider dropping a like and subscribing for more content. Thank you very much for watching and have a wonderful day.